And there we go.
Amazing.
You are live. Right. Let's wait to see if anybody logs into this. I'm just going to share it as well.
Are you sharing this? Are you going to share this via what?
Just on Facebook. We had a slight issue. We tried to get it connected to YouTube for those that weren't on Facebook, but that it's going to take 24 hours to come through. So it'll be ready for next week. So,
okay, fine. So
hello, Simon Cohen.
And they said they're going to. Hi, Simon.
So we've got a few people here already. So
via YouTube. So that's going to be a bit of an issue. I think they're going to have to go back and come in through the.
Yeah. And the good news is I think you can watch this even if you don't have a Facebook account. You don't actually need to log in.
Okay. So let me just put that into the. I'm going to put that into the Rabbi's WhatsApp group to say I'm really sorry the YouTube thing didn't work. We're going to just put that in the.
It will be up and ready for next week.
Put that into the. I'm going to put that into the Rabbi's WhatsApp group to say I'm really sorry the YouTube thing didn't work. I'm going to just put that in the.
Okay, let's get started. Ready, Rabbi Eisenberg?
I'm just sending this out to everybody that the YouTube link didn't work out.
No problem.
We apologize for the connection. What's the Facebook link?
The Facebook link is www.facebook.com/shrubs live. That's shrubs with 2 B's, as it should be.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to get it started because there are some people watching.
Okay.
Sharon Hood is there watching with
Hi, Sharon.
And David. Hello.
And David as well. Hello, everybody.
And hello to
Chava's here. Hi, Chava.
Okay, so we're introducing the first in what we hope will be a series of Sunday night talks or discussions. And there will be no intermission for refreshments, Dr. Sugar. So this will be streaming live, we hope, every Sunday night at 8 o'clock. And the idea of this has very much been to select subjects which they're not easy. They are difficult. They can be contentious. Now, there has been some people that have commented that even by debating such subjects, we are somehow condoning actions that may or may not go against the chief rabbi or the United Synagogue. So I just want to put this in terms that everybody can understand. Our shul doesn't actually go according to the United Synagogue. We're not a member of the United Synagogue. We will inspiration from what happens in the United Synagogue, and we are reading with interest their guidelines that they've sent out as regards reopening communal prayer institutions, but particularly shuls. And in there is some mention as to what goes on in people's gardens. The purpose of tonight's debate is to see both sides of the view. And this, Rabbi, if I'm not mistaken, this goes back to one of the oldest precepts in Judaism, which is examining a particular concept and looking from both sides, whether it's right or wrong. So if we were to look at Gemara, for instance, it is the biggest lesson in critical thinking that people get. And very often we make our young people get this very early on in their lives, from sort of 12 years on. And the purpose of that is that we're encouraging them to look at a concept, even if we know the halacha on it, we're encouraging them to see both sides, for and against. And very often we're able to arrive at a conclusion that might be at odds with how things are, but we're able to accept with respect the way that things are. And that's what I'm asking for this evening. You can all make your comments known. You can see them coming up on the screen over here. But these can be very emotive subjects. We just ask everybody to respect everybody else's opinion. We don't expect everybody to agree. There is, again, not strictly speaking, one right answer to this whole thing. So, Rabbi, we chose this subject because it's something that is doing the rounds at the moment in terms of it's a hot topic, both within the local area and particularly in the shul groups as well. A lot of people are missing shul, and they are missing the communal aspects of shul, being able to see people. And I think that's something that we are able to demonstrate and to show that a shul really is very much more than just the building that we pray in. It is a community, and we need to stay connected now more than ever. And for some people, that lifeline to log into, say, the Zoom Minyonim that have been going on, the shiurim that have been happening, and the various different activities, that is their way of staying connected with their community. But now things are looking like they're being slightly relaxed as far as the government's concerned, and there are talks of people holding garden minyonim. Now, I think it's fairly. I think we should state what those are. So, at the moment, the rules state that you can have up to 6 people socially distanced in your garden, 2 meters apart. And the idea here is that if you've got 1 or more neighbours with 2 gardens adjacent, then you've got 2 lots of 6. So technically speaking, you can have a minyan. And it's possible to daven in that way. It's happening. We know it happened in America. It's very well publicized there, and it's been happening in Israel as well. We're more hesitant about the concept over here, because especially as we're watching in the news at the moment, the R number is still particularly high where we are. So can everybody hear us okay, by the way? If anybody could comment on that, that would be good, because one person's commenting that they can't hear. Iris, can you hear us now? Oh, she's frozen as well. She's probably got a bad internet connection. Okay, so they can hear us. So that's the concept of a garden minyan. And there are circumstances under which we as a shul would think about how we could utilize garden minyonim at this moment. So in the US documents, and this I found very interesting, although it does not condone davening in a garden, it states you can give a share to 6 people in a garden. What do you make of it, Rabbi?
Okay, so I first of all, I'd like to thank David for helping us create this platform. It's really amazing to see that people are willing to engage, people are willing to come. Av can hear, so that's also good. So that means that the technology is working. Right? 6 family units, not 6 people. No, I don't think that's correct, by the way. I think the rule is 6 people, not 6 family units. The 6 family units is incorrect. Francine and Paul are here as well. So Baruch Hashem, we have a lot of people that are willing to come and to listen and that want to connect with us. And I think we wanted to try to connect beyond just the shiurim and beyond just the davening. And this was sort of a way of opening this up to people and saying, you can be heard, you can have your voice heard, maybe not your voice, but definitely your comments, you can ask your questions. And we would like to deal with topics, sensitive issues and issues that people might want to hear about or might want to discuss. I'd like to maybe set the scene for this before we even go back to the question that you've asked and then come to answer your question. I'd like to make it clear, first of all, that tonight's discussion is under no circumstances discussing any minyan that breaks the law. Any minyan that has more than 6 people in one garden is illegal, and that's not being discussed, and we all disagree with it, myself included, and there's no question that that's not what's going on and that's not what's being discussed. Point number 2, and that is, tonight's discussion is also not about trying to denigrate people that are doing things wrong. We know that people are doing things wrong, and I've had it both in the traditional community as well as in the Haredi community, seen plenty of people doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and I'd rather not this whole session turns into a finger-pointing session. They do this or they do that. It's not about pointing fingers either. Rather, it is about discussion. And so today, I mean, I was discussing this with it. So the idea was, and there are a few types of Gan Minyonim. I'd like to discuss two types of Gan Minyonim. One, which I think everybody agrees is okay, and even the police agrees is okay. And then we'll get to the Gan Minyonim that you're discussing, which becomes a little bit more contentious and a little bit more problematic. So early on, before any of the guidance came out and the guidance from the chief rabbi, et cetera, I know there were many people that want to make minyonim in gardens. And for example, we have 3 people in our family that are over bar mitzvah. We have a neighbor that has 3 people that are over bar mitzvah. We have a neighbor who's back to back with us who has 6 or 7 people, depending at the time, in their house that are over bar mitzvah. And we have somebody 2 gardens over that has 2 people that are over bar mitzvah. You add those all together, it's 3 and 3 is 6, plus another 6 is 12, plus another 2 is 14. You have 14 people. There's absolutely no mingling. Everybody's in their own garden. There's nobody in any garden that doesn't belong there. And those have been going on. And I had a friend of mine who had the police called on him on Shavuot because he had a minyan like this. Police came, had one look, said this is fully legal, turned around and left. So those minyanim, I think, are also not what we'd like to discuss. But rather now with the relaxation of the rules, we get to the point where you say, well, I'm allowed to have 6 people in my garden. So if I can have 6 people in my garden and you can have 6 people in your garden and our gardens are adjacent, David, maybe we could make a minyan. So that it suddenly allows people that don't have neighbors with 6 kids over bar mitzvah to also start looking into this idea of having minyonim or not having minyonim. And therefore, the United Synagogue was faced with this question. And I spoke to one of the Rabbonim today, who is he's in charge of the RCUS. He's the head of the RCUS, the Rabbinical Council of the United Synagogue, and worked together with the Office of the Chief Rabbi in the United Synagogue in putting together this. And he said, on the one hand, when they put out the document, this rule of the 6 people hadn't yet come out. It was actually written before that, and it was written before that they knew that rule was coming out. Yeah. However, even now, they're sort of a little bit circumspect. They're trying to be very careful about having those minyonim or not having those minyonim, because one of the issues with those minyonim is they are very hard to police. It's really, really difficult to be able to be on top of everybody. So that means 6 can turn into 7, can turn into 8. And when you get a knock on your door, it says, oh, I heard you guys are davening. Can I come in? No. So it's very hard sometimes to say no.
It's the thin end of the wedge, isn't it?
It is the thin end of the wedge. Very much the thin end of the wedge. And sometimes the wedge is not so thin either. Do you know what I mean?
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second.
Yes.
Because we're going to be joined by somebody. But before I do, I just want to mention something that I should have mentioned at the beginning. Several of the people that I've spoken to over the past week, particularly on this subject, have been volunteers for Misaskim. And I'm sure everybody's aware of the absolutely sterling work that is going on and being carried out by Misaskim to help all parts of the community to bury our dead at this time with respect and in the way that halacha dictates, but in a way that we can still attend. I mean, it's a very, very sad thing. It's horribly tragic, but this concept of a Zoom funeral never existed a year. If you would have told me a year ago that there would have been such a thing, I would have told you it's ridiculous. But there's been Zoom funerals, there's been Zoom shiva houses, and it's allowed us to try and carry on a little bit. The reason I'm mentioning this as well is that Misaskim are appealing for much needed funds. They are funded entirely on donations as far as I'm aware. So to allow them to carry on going, that link will scroll across the bottom now if anybody wishes to donate to their efforts to raise money. But really, when we talk about garden minions, really what we're looking at, where the debate for me changed, because I was very much against it entirely. Under no circumstances, I thought that it broke the spirit of the law. I thought that it actually, in some cases, could break the law itself. And until even when things are relaxed, there's part of you that reads the news and sees the figures, and you still think, this is way too early. I don't want to encourage this from happening. And I think what changed my view of this particular debate is when it comes to Aveilim, people that have lost a loved one and that are in mourning. So one particular person who's very close to the shul, who has whose husband lost two family members, one very close to him, his father. Sounds ridiculous saying very close to him, but the other one wasn't such a close relative. But when I inquired as to how he was doing, her response was that he's doing much better now. And one of the things that changed for him was that up until very recently, he'd not been able to say kaddish anywhere other than at the graveside. And so the next time he was able to say kaddish was as part of a garden minyan that was held locally. And her words were that it was as if his mourning process could start, because as she put it, she'd lost two parents, and the Jewish mourning process is quite prescriptive. It tells you exactly it's a standardized process for everybody. We bury our dead in a certain way. We sit shiva for 7 days, and that structure helps people mourn their loved ones. And it's the structure itself is of great comfort to people. All of a sudden, we find ourselves in very strange times where that structure, even although we've tried to supplement it with Zoom shiva houses, it's not there. And particularly when we talk about saying kaddish. Now, we're about to be joined by a guest. I'm going to just bring him in. Stephen, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, there he is. Okay. Hi, Stephen. Thanks for joining us. So, Stephen, again, we've spoken, but your mother very sadly passed away of coronavirus not long ago. So you've gone through this process firsthand. Tell us. I mean, you've never lost a parent before, so you don't know what you haven't had previous experience of the natural process. But tell us how the sort of Corona era mourning has gone.
It's been very surreal, with everything that even being in the hospital from when my mother was very poorly, and in the corridors it was completely empty, and then going and seeing her, but then going through the process of arranging, like I've helped out before of getting the information together for the to get the green slips and the death certificate, and it's a very different process that's going on at the moment. In a way, it's probably a bit easier with Miss Askim's help, because they're arranging or everything, and then they just email it across to you and print it out and give it to Gold Finds.
Yeah.
But then going to the funeral with we literally only there was 10 men attending, with one person having the Zoom camera so that it could broadcast out. Very, very weird. It's not a funeral which I ever expected to attend or be at. And if I did have a funeral, I would have expected quite a number of people to turn up. And I don't know, I feel, it kind of robs you of the funeral. Was robbed of the shiva. I know it was a short shiva anyway because Pesach.
Because Yom Tov cuts into it, yeah.
Cancelled it out. But again, we just had a Zoom evening, so we had people just come on as would to say anything that they wanted to say, and that was a whole different experience as well, because I think you get to hear what everyone got to hear what everybody else had to say about my mother. Which I think when they do it to you one-on-one in a normal shiva, it's very different.
It's very public for the people that are attending, isn't it?
Very much so. It brings everything out into the public. Yeah. And then now the downside of that is that I've not been able to. The only time I've had to say kaddish is at the graveside. I've not been able to say it since until Garden Minyonim had started. I'm not.
So to put that in context, your road where you live, it's just a regular residential cul-de-sac in Prestwich, of good value. But those houses there, the majority of people there are by and large they're Jewish. Yeah, you have got some non-Jewish neighbours as well.
Correct. So when when the number of 6 you can have in a garden came along, you know, I've heard of other gardens like Rabbi Eisenberg's who've had it where the neighbours, and you just literally, the people that live in the houses open the fences and are able to be in a minyan, where now you can have 6 in a garden. So I took the view, well, if you can have 6 in one garden, 6 in another garden, you've got 12. You've got a minyan. So I sent a text out to some residents on the street and formed a WhatsApp group, and we started Minyonim last week on Monday when the restrictions were lifted.
And everybody's, as I understood from our conversation, you've marked out very clearly what 2 meters is, so that everybody knows exactly where they're stood.
On the first day, I went down with a piece of chalk and a tape measure, and on the path marked out where 2 meters apart from everybody. Unfortunately, the rains washed it away, but we all kind of know where we stand, and we're very, very spaced out, and we're very conscious that maximum of 6 on each side. So even if 2 family members are stood together and there's another one in the garden, we move them across to the other garden, and be very vigilant that we are keeping within the 6 in each. And we've said that only people on our estate can join. We're not opening it to anybody else, because I think it just could cause too many issues. We have to be very careful, and we want to maintain the social distance from each other as well.
And just for context, this isn't something that you guys decided on lightly. This was debated amongst, and to put it in further context, the people who live in your location. These are very sound-minded, rational people, rabbis. You've got an ex-judge, solicitors, etc. Sorry.
A doctor.
A doctor. So you've got people who understand the risks and understand what they're dealing with. And even then it was debated before going ahead. And again, this is with the sole purpose of allowing you to fulfill your duty as a son to say kaddish. That's right.
Very much so. Very much so. Yes. The messages that I got back really was the only reason why we're having the garden minyonim is so that gives me the ability to say kaddish. If it wasn't for me to say kaddish, it's very unlikely that I would be having this garden minyan on our estate.
Right. And Rabbi?
Yes, please. Sorry, I'm trying. I've had so many messages from people upset with me that they're not able to get on because the YouTube link is not working. So I've been busy trying.
We will be uploading it to YouTube later, which will mean that they'll have to watch a replay of it. But
all right. Okay.
Comment. Next week, hopefully, we'll have a YouTube live link as well, so that everybody can see it on YouTube. So Rabbi, there's a really good example of somebody that's a member of our congregation that has taken a decision themselves together with their neighbours to form this minyan. And I mean, Stephen, this is now, it must feel like a burden's been sort of lifted off you in terms of.
Yeah, I've now been able to fulfill the being able to say kaddish. I was going to say, like, I'm not the most regular of shul goers. Rarely go on a weekday, if at all, and go on Shabbos, mainly fair weather. But I do feel, and then since my mother's passed, I have felt that obligation to be part of a minyan, to wanting to say the kaddish, and since then I have joined virtually every single day the
absolutely
Zoom minyan for Shachris and Mincha and Ma'ariv, and now we've got a minyan. We're only at the moment we're only doing Mincha and Ma'ariv. We've not even ventured into Shachris yet. We did Shabbos. It must have been the fastest service I've ever been to, and we're doing Cheichel Kedushas.
It's amazing how much davening you can get through if you cut the talking out, right?
Very much so. Very much so. I think we did it in like 45 minutes.
It's music to the rabbi's ears.
Yeah, how about that?
Rabbi, I bet you'd give your right arm to hear that talking in shul again right now, eh?
Well, I don't know about I like my right arm a little bit. I'm not sure I'm willing, but yeah, maybe the left one.
So, Stephen, that's an interesting perspective, and obviously, just wanted to hear it from you because it's easy for it's easy for those of us who've never lost a parent, but particularly never lost a parent during this time, to give their opinion as to what is right and what is wrong. But this has very much been an individual decision, one that hasn't been taken as part of a community or dictated to you by a community. You've decided to take it yourself, and I think this is going to be a very common experience for people in your position.
Yeah, it's tough. It's you have to, if you want to be part of one, you have to go and find it. Really, it's not on every doorstep,
No.
and then you've got to have the will of people to attend each time. I know depends on where you are within the community here, but if you're living in Outer Prestwich, and it might be harder to do it rather than round the Bishop's Road, Tewkesbury Drive, Kings Road area, where I'm sure there's lots of Minyonim going on all the time. But if you're where I used to live, around Butterstyle Close and Hilton, off Hilton Lane, around there, it's going to be much harder to have a minyan. And
so when you look at that happening, I mean, for you now, this is the future for as long as the circumstances will allow. I guess that if the rate creeps up and again government advice becomes stricter, you'll shut it down straight away as well.
Very much so. We're very, very much of the law of the land. We're following the law of the land. If the law says that you can only have one person meeting or no one at all, it's shut down, it stops, and I'll be back to coming back onto Zoom every day.
Okay, well, I'm sure they miss you in the Zoom minyan. Rabbi, is there anything you want to ask Stephen before we let him go?
No, I think Stephen's been pretty straightforward with his experience, and thank you so much for sharing that experience with us. I'm sure it's not an easy experience to have to share, because it's an emotional time, having gone through right before Pesach, not having had a proper shiva, not having had a proper funeral, not being able to say kaddish the way you really want to, and the fact that in the last week, that's all been able to change due to the relaxation of the government guidelines. And yet you keep within the government guidelines very strictly. And on the other hand, you still are able to have your minyan. That's for you, as David mentioned about that other individual as well. It's a tremendous release.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. That's very helpful. We're going to let you go. You can tune in with the rest of them. Here we go.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, Stephen. Bye-bye.
Yeah. I feel it's like the BBC over here, David. You're good.
It's good, right? It's okay,
Yeah.
but some people are experiencing a little bit of reception freezing every now and again. I don't know if that's their internet or ours, so we'll keep going because I think the majority of people can still hear us. But really grateful for Stephen to coming on and giving his perspective. It's
I want
hard.
to go back to the question you asked before, because we were sort of in the middle of that.
Go for it.
The question that David asked, just for those who tuned in a bit later, the question that was asked is that the chief rabbi has put out, or it's not really the chief rabbi, the United Synagogue has put out guidelines. Within those guidelines, they say they will not publicize, they will not support, and they will not condone garden minyonim. Neither will they loan any Sifrei Torah to any of those minyonim. On the other hand, later on in ideas, they say, well, the rabbi can run a shir of 6 people. So I put that question actually to my colleague at the United Synagogue and said, how does it work? He was a little bit uneasy with the question because he didn't want to go into it. But I think mainly it's a lot about control, meaning that if we as a community stood up and said, you know what, guys, go out there, make garden minyonim, these are the rules, you don't know that people are or aren't going to listen. I'll give you an example. We had a funeral recently where people wanted to be there for the actual Levaya. So it wasn't right to come to the Eisenberg, but people wanted to be there to sort of watch the car go past. And we sent out an email saying, please park on the side of such and such a street. As they go past, you can then follow along in your car if you wanted to. You could just say a prayer if you wanted to in your car. And what basically happened was instead is everybody came out of their cars. Everybody stood next to each other. Social distancing went out the window over there entirely. People were having all sorts of conversation, definitely closer than 2 meters. And I realized that when you give people a finger, they start taking the whole hand. And it's very, very...
That's what the government's worried about as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, look, the truth is, and this is very damning for us as a, the government was going to allow synagogues and places of worship to open earlier. And then recently there have been some issues with different, I think with more than one religion, but different people going out and doing more things than they should have. And the government has come back to our community and to other faith communities and said, we as the government don't trust the faith communities because we allow you to do X and you do X, Y, Z and A and B and C.
Yeah.
And so when the rabbi runs, if I were to run a shir in my house, let's say, I mean, this will make things really complicated because how am I going to invite 5 people and not insult the other people in the shul? But, if I would invite 5 people, I can make it 5 people only. It's my home. It's my house. These are the 5 people that are coming and that's it. Whereas...
That's exactly right, isn't it? It's not something official.
Right.
A comment from Laura.
Yeah, Laura says it cannot be something official. And I mean, the problem, but the issue is, on the other hand, when you don't have anything official, and that's what I've seen in Broughton Park, I found that a lot of people doing whatever they want to because nobody's come out with any official guidelines. So everyone's just said, look, we've not seen anybody dying recently, so the Minyonim have just grown and grown and grown. And I know people having very big Minyonim. Minyonim that forget about 6 people, we got 10 or 20 people, well beyond that. So they say, well, it's a big garden and we measured it up. It's against the law. And if we came out in a way and we gave them guidelines, maybe it would be easier. So it's a very hard balance. I hear what Laura is saying. If you make it official, then you're giving it your stamp of approval. But if you don't give it guidelines, then people go way, way beyond what they should be doing. And it puts us in a catch-22 no matter what you want to do.
So going back, there's a question that is recurring, and I'm going to try and bring them all up so that people can see them. Once we were talking to Stephen, Phil asked, I didn't get a chance to ask this of Stephen, but it's an interesting question. What is the reaction of, I guess the question he's asking, what is the reaction of non-Jewish neighbours to seeing a garden minyan taking place? And I think Stephen's still there. 1 second. Stephen. Bring you back in.
Thank you.
Stephen, have you had any issues? Do they know that it's happening? Have you managed expectations by speaking to them beforehand?
So it's very interesting, this specific question, because where we're actually davening is within the front of 2 houses in a secluded area on the cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
Now the houses is non-Jewish, but is not there at the moment. So we asked them permission if we could use their front garden for the minyan, and they said yes. And so he was okay with it, and we got the number from the person from the other non-Jewish neighbour that lived across the road, and she seemed to be okay with it. So within that area where we are surrounded by the non-Jewish people in that specific area, they seemed to be perfectly okay with it. So,
because that's a point that's echoed here by Michael Laurie, who's asking, what about Maris Iron? So what if people are seeing, and that, I must tell you, a few weeks ago, the executive of this shul were approached by a local caterer who is running a takeaway service, and they asked if they could park their van outside the shul. And the decision at the time that was taken by the executive was that we could not allow that to carry on, not because we don't like the fantastic food that they're going to be producing, and not because they wouldn't be running their business within the guidelines. It was more because we felt that if the neighbours that surrounded, if they were to see Jews in any form congregating around the synagogue, they may be seen as to be breaking the guidelines in some way. So we didn't want to encourage it. But you do worry about how the public perception is, don't you?
Yeah, of course you do. But you've got to then try and be as private as possible. Do it we're not doing it out in the open. No one really driving past that can see it. In order to really look for it, you've got to go down that side street to find it, it's very unlikely that would happen. We did have options of doing it elsewhere in the cul-de-sac, but we thought in the gardens area, it was then too overlooked by other people that could see us. And really, we're doing it more hidden in a way, to try to avoid. We're very concerned of our neighbours. Like, there's no singing. We're not being loud. We're not doing anything after. We wouldn't do anything after 9 o'clock. There was a debate: should we meet for Ma'ariv on Motzi Shabbos? And it was 11 o'clock. We could have put some lights on, but it was far too late. So we're trying to be as respectful as possible to our neighbours as well. We have gained permission of our non-Jewish neighbour, who was able to lend us their driveway. So far so good.
What I would add is actually that all the different guidelines that I've seen given out by the Haredi Rabbonim, I know in Broughton Park they've not given a guideline, but I know in Gateshead they've given guidelines, in Northwest London they've given guidelines, in Prestwich the Rabbonim have given guidelines, and they've all made it very clear that one of the overarching and overriding things is to keep the peace with your neighbors. And so no matter, and I spoke yesterday to one of the Rabbonim in Prestwich who said to me, don't assume because your neighbor is Jewish that they are actually happy with your garden minyan. You need to ask not only all your non-Jewish neighbors, you actually need to even ask all your Jewish neighbors. They might have little kids who are going to sleep and you're going to wake them up with your davening. They might have elderly people who can't bear the noise. So you really need to ask everyone, not just non-Jews, but even Jews. And I know in Gateshead they've made that very clear. In Northwest London and in Prestwich, they made it very clear that you need to make sure that your minyan does not interfere with people's schedules. It does not disturb anybody, and that your minyan is not going to be something that's going to be out and it's going to be creating hatred. To come back to the question of Marit Ayin that Michael asked as well, we had okay. So it's interesting. We'll see that. We'll come back to that comment that Modi made in a minute. But we had at one point, the people wanted to do the minyan in the front gardens, and everybody stood in the front garden. But what happened in our road was everybody stayed in their own front garden. We said, well, it's no worse than clapping. In the same way everybody can come out of the front garden and clap, we can come out of the front garden and daven. And we did that one day on Pesach. And as soon as we did that, suddenly we saw our neighbors from down the road stood in the middle of the street. Our neighbors from the other side also stood in the middle of the street. And I said, we have to stop right now. This is not okay. Anybody who looks out the window says, look, I can understand they're standing in their front garden and they're standing in their front garden, but what are the guys doing in the middle of the road? What are they doing there? And this was definite Maris Ayin, and we never daven in the front garden again. That was something that was shut down from the word get-go. So everything ended up back in the back gardens. But just because you're in the back garden doesn't mean that your next door neighbor wants to hear your shochin out at 9 o'clock in the morning on Shabbos morning.
That's true. Stephen, we're going to let you go again, and I won't bring you back in, so you can
I'll be around.
You can do whatever you want. Thanks, Stephen. So just going back, I mean, a lot of the comments that we're getting, there's some fantastic comments coming in. So I'm just going to go through them. So Sheila Morris had thought the guidelines had already been given. So let's address that now. I mean, you did just touch on that anyway. There have been guidelines given. I've read the United Synagogue guidelines. Every other sentence says, but it's subject to further guidance to be released from the government. Yeah. And so very much, I think everybody has to appreciate and understand that neither the chief rabbi, nor the United Synagogue, nor even the United Kingdom's government has ever dealt with a situation like this, ever. And these are, everybody kept saying this at the beginning of this, but these are unprecedented times and unprecedented circumstances. But to a certain extent, a lot of people are making it up as they go along, with the best will in the world. They are trying to do the best that they can with the current information that's in place today. Again, I don't think there is one universal set of guidelines that everybody's sticking to.
Yeah, so what I would say is two things. Number one, the rabbi that I spoke to today said that the chief rabbi is looking back into garden minyonim. As things change, the chief rabbi has also might change his stance. That means this is not an ironclad stance that they've taken and they're not going to change whatsoever. That's the first thing that I would say. The other thing, and this point that you just mentioned before, has been mentioned to me by many people who are, I think, abusing that comment, but they're saying even the government has no idea what they're doing. What six is not okay, 6 is okay, and 7's not okay, and 8's really dangerous. And if you go into a park, then in a park, you could have 60 people next to each other, 2 meters apart, and nobody says anything about it. As soon as it turns into my garden with the same distances between people, it becomes not okay. And so they're feeling very much like this whole thing, the government is making it up, and they don't have the same ethos that we have about prayer, about how important it is, etc., etc. And so they feel in the same way the government's making it up. If I am being safe and I am going to be standing 2 meters away from everybody in my garden, even if there are more than 6 people in my garden, it actually isn't dangerous. The number 6 is a number they plucked out of a hat. Is it?
Yeah. Oh, look, initially it was you allowed one other person. And I think the people felt that unfair because really it was actually hurting families with both parents that wanted to visit and see their grandkids and see their children or whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. So it meant you could either have mum or dad, but you couldn't have both of them, which seems silly, as mum was going to go home to dad and anyway give them whatever they've already picked up on that journey. I don't think there's a person that's ventured out to the shops or to work, or to wherever it is that they're traveling these days out of necessity, that hasn't come back home feeling that perhaps they, even through taking all the precautions, they may have picked something up along the way. It's very, very difficult. Even with gloves and masks and you name it, there's always an opportunity for infection to spread. So I think those initial guidelines that were given with that one other person were a little bit ridiculous. And then they expanded it to 6. To me, reading the news and watching the press briefings, I feel that they did it because they saw that the public were taking matters into their own hands anyway and deciding what they were going to do. And I'm going to just flash up a comment here on screen from Modi Spitzer. So Boris said that the British people should use common sense. Well, anybody that's seen coverage of the protests this weekend, anybody that saw, and it's not just protests, because I understand that the protests that took place this weekend, that they are grounded in legitimacy in terms of the argument that people should speak out against racism. I agree with that.
That was never up for discussion.
That's a given. That's a given. But when you look at the social distancing that was clearly non-existent, it makes you think about common sense. But it take away a protest. Let's go back to last weekend and the weekend before that. Pictures in the newspapers of the beaches absolutely packed with people. You cannot rely on the good old-fashioned British common sense any longer, it would seem.
Now, and the other thing I would say is, as from families go, I have this joke with my neighbor in his back garden, because at some points he's got 7 people in his back garden, and I said, one of your kids has to go back inside, because there's 7 of you. You can't have 7. This is illegal. He says, no, but we're one family. I said, so, the problem is that even if you could have one set of grandparents over, that assumes back that you have a family made up of a father, a mother, and 2 children, and then you can have grandma and grandpa coming to visit them. Yeah. But as soon as you have a father and a mother and 3 children, we're not talking about a father and mother and 12 or 15 children. We're not talking about these ultra huge families. A father and mother and 3 children, that's 5 people already. Then you're back to saying, well, either only grandma or grandpa can come, but they can't come together. Yeah. So again, 6 seems a little bit arbitrary. And the problem is, I think we have to realize, on the one hand, we have to be law-abiding citizens. And even if the rules don't make sense, that doesn't mean we're allowed to break them. That doesn't mean we should say, well, it doesn't make any sense. So therefore, the whole thing, throw out the baby with the bathwater. The whole thing is nonsense, which somebody said to me this week. I spoke to someone and I said, how come so many people aren't socially distancing? He says, have you read the rules? They make absolutely no sense. If it makes no sense, then there's no point in keeping any of it, which isn't true.
We're going to try and get through some of the comments here. And one of them that keeps getting asked by a few different people in different ways, but Robert Nathan's phrasing of it probably puts it best. He says that Rabbi in the past has mentioned that a minyan in rooms in shul would not constitute a total minyan. Is this the same in different gardens? So a lot of people are saying, well, look, the gardens are separated by a fence or a hedge or a shrub. Is that a minyan?
So that's a big question in halacha. There's a huge debate about it, and the bottom line with the whole debate is that even those that will say this is a minyan will say this is only a minyan under extenuating circumstances. And the only reason it can be counted as a minyan is if you have people can see each other, so that you have 10 people that are in clear view of each other. So that's what we had in our gardens. When we did it originally, when it was just 3 of us in our garden and 3 of us in the garden next door, we would always ask the person with the 7 people, I said, no, you got to come closer to the fence because I can't see you. Yeah. If I can't see you, the fact that you're somewhere over there behind the fence in some room is irrelevant. And so that's correct. The halacha says, unless you can see 10 people, you don't have a minyan. And there are some rabbanim that say, even if you can see 10 people, it's not a minyan. In general, the consensus seems to be, definitely in Israel, where you've seen all these minyonim on porches and balconies, that they have allowed it. And I think most people here have allowed it, or I've heard some very big rabbanim who've also come out and said that these minyonim don't work, and therefore they don't want to, that they should have, for example, they should always have a heicha kedusha. They should always say, they shouldn't have the repetition of the Amidah, because it's a question of bracha levatala. It would be a question of saying all these blessings, and if the minyan's not a minyan, then in reality you don't have what's necessary to be able to halachically allow you to have the repetition of the Amidah.
And not only that, you're taking a massive risk. I mean, as Clive says, that the death rate in the Jewish community is more than twice the national death rate. It's worth pointing out, Clive, obviously, that a lot of black and ethnic minority communities as well are suffering disproportionately when it comes to the prevalence of the virus and also the mortality rate as well. It's not something that is just down to our area or just down to our religion. It's something that affects a lot of people in this country from all different walks of life. But it is a massive risk to take if it's not going to be a kosher event.
So that's what people feel. If within the government guidelines it is legal, then obviously the government feels this isn't a risk to be taken. You've not taken. If I was meeting up with 6 people and my next door neighbor, I'm sorry, I can't meet up with 6. If I was meeting up with 5 people in my garden, right? Let's make it legal. I'm not meeting with 6 people. If there's 6 of us in our garden and 6 of us in the garden next door, all shooting the breeze or having a barbecue together, sitting socially distanced, that's okay. And what basically is being said now is as soon as one of them goes from making a barbecue to saying Amin Yehi Shmei Rabbah, the danger of that whole party and get together becomes quadrupled. And some people just don't buy that. Whereas other people say, why are you taking unnecessary risks? It isn't necessary that you should daven like that. So why are you doing that? Instead, daven at home, daven with Zoom, do whatever you can. God will forgive you for it. And anybody who feels uncomfortable davening with a minyan at this point and davens at home or davens with Zoom or whatever it is, God will never look at them after 120 and say, why didn't you go out to a garden minyan? You didn't go out to a garden minyan for legitimate reasons, so then that so be it.
So there are 50 people watching live just a minute ago. And lots of comments coming in. So forgive me if I missed some of you, but I'm going to try and get through all of you as much as possible.
Let's try to get to the comments.
Okay, so Sheila's asked about weddings. Again,
okay,
are those happening?
Okay, weddings is a really difficult question. And the point with weddings is as follows. What happens with weddings is that you have a young couple that meets. Imagine you have your young Haredi couple. They meet. They usually have a 2 or 3 month engagement. They have never touched before in their life. They have never kissed. They've never hugged. They've never anything. This is a real issue. I have people from our community that get engaged. They tell me they're getting married in 18 months. And for them, it could be 36 months also because they're living together. You know, whenever it is that the rabbi is going to pronounce the blessing, they'll pronounce the blessing. But for these people, they are really sort of itching. They're really, they want to get moving. They want to start their married life. They don't want to wait. They've not been living it as husband and wife for 5 years already. So it's very, very difficult for them to be able to sort of do this and to be able to, on the other hand, you have rules that say you cannot, social distancing rules. So what I would say about weddings is it is not illegal to have a chuppah. A chuppah is not considered a wedding in English law. and therefore it's not considered like you're having a wedding against the law. However, in order to be able to have a wedding, you need to have 10 people present to be able to say Sheva Brachos. The only way to be able to do that with social distancing is very, very complicated. You need 2 or 3 gardens. You need people standing far apart. It's not going to be easy. So hypothetically speaking, can you have people getting married? Yes. At the moment, is it the right thing to do? Probably not. Does that mean people are not getting married? No.
So this echoes a comment made by Stephen Verber, and again, there's a few other comments. Having 6 people in separate gardens may be within the letter of the law, but it clearly isn't within the spirit of the law.
Right. So the question here is, what is the spirit of the law? What is the law trying to achieve with this spirit of the law? And there is another spirit that for a lot of people is going on, and they have a Jewish spirit in them as well. Oh, David's here. I'm glad to see that you're here, because for a while David wasn't able to get on. Right? The law says that we have to stick to it. Says what? He's talking about the wedding.
I think the law has obviously given guidance as regards, and I think the big date that everybody is looking in organized religion is looking for is the 4th of July, because things are going to change after that.
Well, it's no earlier than the 4th of July. The honest truth is we don't know that things are going to change on the 4th of July, and we don't know how we're going to reopen. I mean, I think the only time we can have an intelligent conversation about reopening the shul is on the 3rd of July or on the 2nd of July, because the government guidance could change 4 more times. We could sit and have a 2-hour meeting only for everything to be scrapped on the 2nd of July. But because
one of the things we might as well talk about, because obviously it's being hang on, Robert Nathan's got another comment here. To follow this up, I don't want to be pedantic. If the shul room walls were replaced with clear walls so you could see people, is that okay? It's the same principle of seeing people.
The answer would be yes.
That would be okay. So, well, that touches on what I was about to say. Shul, whenever we get back to shul, whenever that is, even if they release guidance saying only a few of us are up to 30 or whatever it may be, it's going to look very, very different to how it did before. And this is a particular concern because we are headed fast toward towards Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, at times where people, without going, for some people, it's the only time that they'll go to shul. And for some people, it's their only yearly connection with their religion. And a lot of people will be wondering whether or not they get to go to shul, whether they get to hear shofar. And simply put, the guidance, at least that I've read in the US documents, looks like everybody's going to have to sit 2 meters apart, which means that we're going to take up more physical space. And the whole service is going to take a completely different, is going to look completely different.
Right. So again, coming back to this fellow that I spoke to today, he said actually that it could be that they might change the 2 meters to 1 meter. Now, I don't know if that is or isn't going to happen, but I made the mistake mathematically and he corrected me. But if they go from 2 meters apart to 1 meter apart, that allows you 4 times as many people, not twice as many people, really. Because 2 times 2 is 4 square meters and 1 times 1 is only 1 square meter. So you got 4 times 1 times 1 in a square of 2 times 2, whatever. Forgetting about the mathematics of it, but it means
that my mind there.
Sorry.
We'll take the word for it.
What it means is that if we go from 2 meters to 1 meter, we'll have a lot more space. Yes, I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to be very inventive, very creative in making sure that everybody can come to davening, et cetera, et cetera. But again, we will have to wait and see what the guidelines are going to be. So if the guidelines say that children cannot come, then as much as I'd love to see the children cannot come. If the guidelines say anybody over 70 is at high risk, we would recommend to anybody over 70 that they don't come, but we cannot forbid it for them. And anybody who's at certain high risk definitely shouldn't be coming because, so how are they going to hear shofar? Okay, so you'll have a lot of Lubavitch people and you'll have a lot of other volunteers and people can be running around. And I'm sure Prestwich is going to be, everyone's going to say that if I hear one of those toots, I'm going to go crazy. Yeah. But plenty of people will be hearing shofar all around the streets, everywhere. We're going to have to make all these changes. And again, until a few days before Rosh Hashanah, when we know where we're at, nobody really knows what it's going to look like. So at the moment, the United Synagogue is being as careful as they can and saying, considering current guidelines, this is the best case scenario we can see. But if the guidelines get better, then we might have an even better case scenario.
Do you want to guess? There's a bit of a Shrubs inside joke, but do you want to guess what concern the president has about the High Holy Day services?
Well, I would say that the parallel minyan should become the normal minyan.
There you go, the parallel minyan. That's
because. Well, no, the issue now that the chief rabbi writes in his guidance, and Ian was saying this before at Mincha, that that it's much harder in a shul with pews to wipe everything down, to keep everything clear. It will be a lot easier in the shul hall. That's what the guidance says. So forgetting about Yom HaNoraim, even Shabbos, it might be a lot easier for us to set up 30 seats in the Hilton Suite, 40, whatever we'll be allowed to, set them up in the Hilton Suite and make it work in the Hilton Suite rather than dining in the main shul. It just might work better.
So we've got some great comments coming in there. That's from Modi. The shofar is going to sound very good.
Because a lot of people have heard shofar before in the streets. It's not, or if you go inside, by that point, you might be allowed to go inside somebody's house. So you could blow the shofar inside the house. You don't have to blow it on the street.
You may be able to. It's doubtful, but here we go. Kate Laurie's said something which I think is quite important. If children can't come, there'll be lots of people caring for them who couldn't come either. So naturally, the numbers of people that are going to be able to come. I mean, look at how many kids we had in shul last Yom Kippur. It was
unbelievable.
I can't even remember. Was it 120, 130? It was amazing.
People for the lunch plus a lot of others. I mean, there must have been at least 150 people on the kids on the campus. And like you said, if the parents, as Kate makes a very, very clear point, and Clyde makes an important point as well. So if you have people that are over that have children that those children need looking after, so then they won't be able to come to shul. So maybe you'll have to make some kind of split with your husband. You come for Shachris and he comes for Musa, or vice versa. I'm not sure. My wife and I, or my wife and my neighbor they've done that. Although again, we'll have to see if that's going to be legal this year. So one year, my wife always watches my neighbor's kids for Shachris, and then they watch for Musa, or vice versa. Yeah. Each one of them can get out to be able to hear their husband davening.
I've got to say, childcare in general is a massive issue that people have at the moment because whilst most of the schools locally are still not open, and some of
Barry's not opening till September. Actually, I think they put out.
I've got to tell you, there's some very cautious parents here who would not allow their kids to go back to school anyway. They think it's too early, whether or not the government says so. Some people take the same view for shul. I'm not sure exactly where I would stand on that issue either. But the point is that a lot of people have got are going to be sent back to work now this month that haven't had to worry about childcare because they've been at home for 8 to 10 weeks, trapped, as it were. It's a lovely trap because and as much as the schoolwork has been a little bit challenging, and by the way, any teachers watching, I have utmost respect for what you people do. Yeah. Anyone that can educate my children, hats off to you. Done a great job. But really, it has been a very challenging period, but it's going to become even more challenging as we as human beings, we want to try and get back to normal as possible, but we still don't have the childcare element. So it's going to reflect on what we do in shul as well. Yeah. Just to pick up on a couple of different points. One of the points that was raised earlier by Michael Gasworth, and again, it's been made a couple of times. I'm going to just scroll through. On the way to scrolling, this is Jeff Radovan's opinion. Unfortunately, Jeff thinks that we should be looking at keeping safe distance on both road and gardens. As mentioned to the rabbi this morning, we're all in this together. Also, the R rate has gone up in Manchester, which is something that we're very much aware of. Michael has mentioned that the main issue you can see with social distance Minyonim is that they have 6 in each garden, when the major issue is when it starts to rain. All of a sudden, 6 people seem to move under cover closer together than before. And although that might sound like a very obvious point, it's a practical consideration, isn't it?
It's very much blessed.
We've been blessed whilst we couldn't do garden minyan. We've been blessed with fantastic weather, but right now, as you can see outside, it's not great.
Yeah, so I know garden minyanim that when it rained, they've just abandoned. And a lot of the garden minyanim that I know, it's all neighbors. So if it's all neighbors, if it starts raining, you're not going to sort of come into my house. You'll just go back home to your house. So if my next door neighbor came into my garden let's say, for example, and it started raining, he wouldn't have to try to find shelter in my house. He would just go back to his house, which is next door, and go in there. But yeah, if you have 6 strangers from 6 different houses that are in one garden, I can see how that definitely can start becoming a real problem. I know in certain places, they, we'll come back to that question soon. In certain places, they have set up gazebos or tents, outdoor tents, so that everybody is still sort of underneath, outside but undercover. Yeah. So we'll go back to that question.
Just to go back to Clive's thing, and I think one of the points that I've thought about over the past week, whilst we were discussing this subject, is there are very clear instances in Jewish history where people have risked their lives to do something. I suppose to hold Minyonim. There is the well-documented story in the Haggadah where they were doing their duty at Pesach while stuck in a cave, I believe, and that was because they were worried about, I think, was it Roman persecution at the time?
Yeah.
So there have been times, and certainly there are numerous instances, stories from the Holocaust where they were able to bake a matzah or to blow a shofar or to daven in a minyan. Now, obviously, we can't compare the two instances because for many people, and I was discussing this with somebody else today, they said to me, well, the difference of the Holocaust for anybody that was in a concentration camp at that time and risked their lives to daven with a minyan, they considered themselves already dead. And so the risk, if you like, they were willing to take because they were at the lowest point they could possibly be. But this is very different, isn't it? Because we are living in a modern age. We've got Zoom. There's no need to risk life.
So I mean, the other thing that I would say the difference is that it came from persecution. And I think when you, especially as a persecuted minority, if Jews are very much like that, if you tell me I can't, I'm going to show you that I can. But here, we're not a persecuted minority. The reason the government has shut down shuls is not because they're anti-Semitic. The reason the government has shut down, and they didn't even shut down shuls. We shut them down even before the government shut them down. But the reason we shut down our shuls was for the safety. The government says, look, guys, this isn't safe for you. Why are you doing this when this is really a bad idea? They're trying to safeguard us, not to bring us down. So coming back to that question, if there is, and I believe this to be true, if there is a question of an increase of pikuach nefesh or danger or etc., whatever it might be, in any way to any individual by davening in a minyan, then that person should not daven in a minyan. They definitely should not be davening in a minyan. The question will be a regular sort of, I don't know what you call, everybody likes to consider themselves middle-aged, It's I was going to say middle-aged thing here myself.
I'm still young. I'm not 40 yet. I'm not middle-aged yet.
You're younger than me. We've had that conversation. It was only a little bit, right? So, if, anybody, reasonably healthy, et cetera, they don't consider that if I'm keeping within the government guidelines, they don't consider that a major risk. I would come back. One thing I would say is that, coming back to the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, there are those actually, and this is a question already becoming what they would call in the yeshivas being a little bit lumdish, which means that we're going to get a little bit into things, sort of a little bit So somebody said, well, if you have a garden minyan, 6 people in this garden and 6 people in that garden, then really it's 12 people getting together. It's not 6 and 6. And others say, well, no, it's 6 and 6. So if it's 12 people getting together, then it goes against not only the spirit of the law, but actually goes against the law. And that's what somebody I spoke to was saying. Others were saying, well, no, it's 6 here and 6 there. It's not really. But it is very important to keep on top of anybody for whom it's even a question of an increased risk should not be davening in a minyan. For anyone for whom the question is not really that much of a risk, so then that's for them to make their own decision on.
We've been going for just a little over an hour now, and there are still 44 people that are watching, 45 people that are watching, and I promise you, if the numbers drop significantly, I would go straight to the ad break, but we'll keep going for a little bit longer.
Just a few more comments, and we'll wrap up, I think.
Very, very interesting comments coming in. Just going to go back to Stephen Verber. He's talking about how shul might run. Before you do that, you need to ask the members if they would even come if services were running. Well, look, there's 45 of you listening to this right now. It'd be interesting to see in the comments if there were services running Obviously, with social distancing, would it be something that you were interested in coming back to, or is it something that you would put off to a later and safer time? But
I think we could probably find 10 people that would say yes, they're coming. It doesn't need a huge amount of people to run it. But I think Stephen makes a very good point. If we don't have 10 people, then for all of us to put ourselves at risk to come together into a room where there's only 8 of us, where we're not even having a minyan, that's definitely, there's no point. So I don't know. Stephen might be absolutely right. Again, this is a question that we'll need to put to the people. The people have to vote with their feet.
I've got quite a sort of, it seems harshly worded, but I know Gary is extremely passionate, and it's a point of view that needs to be put across. Sorry, I'm going to obscure your face whilst we pop it up on the screen. So Stephen Verber was saying earlier that there's not, you obviously clearly stated that people who are davening at home, they won't get looked down upon at the end of their days for not having attended a garden minyan. And he asked, why aren't more Rabbonim basically giving the same guidance? But Gary's obviously commented, Stephen, what planet are we on? They don't need forgiving. They're the ones that are doing the right thing. There's no obligation to daven at the moment as part of a minyan. And in fact, it's illegal against the OCR guidance. So that's the Office of the Chief Rabbi and Halacha. We need people living Judaism, not just learning it. Pekuach Nefesh takes precedent over having a minyan. And this is clear now just how much people just need to be seen to be doing things. It just shows how far detached we've become from Judaism, prioritizing the minyan over, I guess he means over Pekuach Nefesh. Again, that's a very extreme opinion, and Gary, amongst the executive members, was extremely outspoken about this, and it gave birth to our chat tonight to examine both sides of the story. What would you say to Gary?
So I hear what Gary is saying, and that I think that there are a lot of people that don't agree with his assessment of it. Again, as I said, the chief rabbi is reconsidering this stance on the garden minyonim. I think there are plenty of people that say if it runs, with the social distancing guidelines and it runs with the law, then it is, it is within the confines of the law. So you say, well, it goes against the spirit of the law. Again, coming back to the story that I told, when the police officer came and had a look at this minyan, they turned around and said, this is legal, and left. They didn't say, you guys are going against the spirit of the law. Actually, as far as I understand, they even had some cheesecake from the family before they left on Shavuos. So I don't think that goes against social distancing guidelines, taking cheesecake from you've never met before. Right, but I think to say that it is against halacha, I'm not sure it is correct. I think some people will say it is against halacha, and some people will not say it's against halacha. That is it's up for debate whether it is or it isn't against halacha. And whether it is or it isn't pikuach nefesh. Many doctors have been asked and have said this is not pikuach nefesh. And I would take my guide. If a doctor came to me and said what you're doing, even if you're standing 2 meters apart from everybody else in your garden, is not okay, and you're endangering your life, then doctors are doctors, and in the end of the day, they know about medication better than anything. Right, so Clive says, go back to that comment.
Clive saying the 2 meter rule does not remove the risk completely, only reduces it. Same applies to garden minyonim. Their risk is still greater than davening at home, which is why over 70s are still being advised to stay at home. Now, whilst we're on that point, obviously we asked the question if people would be interested in coming back to shul. So Sharon Hood has stated probably not. Kate Lurie has her priorities well and truly correct.
But there's
no double dipping at the Kiddushim, please. There will be no Kiddushim.
For a long time. Even if we're not going to have Kiddushim for a long time.
Kate, we're going to get to the stage where you'll be begging for double dipping because there just won't be Kiddushim. Modi is saying that he'd camp outside the night before we open just to make sure he gets a front row seat. Jeff Radovan would be happy to attend every few weeks. Martin Glass, hello, Martin. Nice to see you. I would run to shul, but sadly my underlying health issue would prevent me. So Martin is in the same category as a lot of people. Chava is indeed in that category as well. She'd love to come to shul. Unfortunately, her son is high risk, but personally, she can't wait to return to shul where there's a real gap in her life, and it's lovely to hear. Ian, is jumping on the Kate Laurie bandwagon. It will be a very long time before Kiddushin take place, certainly not till next year. And again, he's followed that up with a presidential decree that Kiddushim are an absolute no-no.
By the way, he means 2021, not the next year as in Tishrei.
Okay. And Stefan again has reiterated that he wouldn't be happy to coming to shul. Anthony, having not been out for nearly 12 weeks, I would be very nervous in attending a minyan. Continue to tune in via Zoom there, Anthony. Laura Greenberg, no, she wouldn't come back. She's happy at home. But Laura did state that it would be nice. It'd be nice to get together before Yom Tov virtually, and obviously we'll continue doing these discussions. So we'll be seeing everybody and connecting. But it would be nice to have some sort of a Zoom get together. I'm sure there's lots that the rabbi and the team have got planned. So stay tuned. Sheila Morris, she would come to shul, but she's classed as high risk due to health issues. So she's very upset about that. Stephen Verber saying it won't be that busy, so you won't have to queue up outside or sleep in the street.
You seem to be right, Stephen.
Phil, I'm afraid that the choir, along with Kiddushim, are the first casualties. We're going to have to ban the choir. It's been something I've been looking to do for many, many, many years, but now we're going to have to do it on health grounds. Michael Laurie, the 2-meter rule is under discussion as some countries and organizations such as the WHO are doing 1.5 meters or 1 meters, and this is medically being challenged. So again, it's that sense that things are, are changing. Ian, I would be there, but Janine won't be able to come since my little two are below 2. But you can bet Ian Creek will be there. If there's a minyan, he's there. He is the shul man. Michael Gasworth, I do think you should consider what's happening with Premier League football coming back. It's all about the money, unfortunately. So there's this debate going on at the moment amongst contact sports, football being one of them. Obviously, they're going to bring it back in some form. But let's face it, they do get extremely close during an average game. I understand that the crowds are going to be, there are not going to be crowds, but they're going to be playing the chants that the fans would normally be singing. They're going to be playing those, so that at least there's some atmosphere. We could do that in shul, right? We could during
the week. Try that.
We could have the talking recorded, so that we could have that low-level murmur.
Yeah.
Shah. And Clive Moss Barkley, I miss shul, but my life is important to me. Well, your life is important to us as well, Clive. So carry on going. Right, let's have a look here. Francine, I would want to come, but not sure that she would take the risk. Sue Lynn, hi Sue. She'd be scared to come. Sharon Hood said there'll be no singing, and I think that's true. Right. Stephen and Debbie would have to think very carefully about coming. And again, I think people would want to know from the executive and from the shul as a whole what the very clear plans are before anybody comes back anywhere, so that they know what to expect when coming to shul. And I know that those are discussions that we've had as an executive, but at the moment
we're not anywhere near.
There's not enough information there for us to make a decision. Well,
by the sounds of it, it doesn't sound like there's that many people that are looking. That there are a lot of people that would like to come back, but there are very few people.
Michael Laurie spotted a marketing opportunity which have branded shrubs face coverings. Can you use yarmulke as a face covering?
If it doesn't smell.
It smells like a estate agent, mine. Okay, so these are very interesting points. I spoke to Adam earlier today, our Rabbi Adam Kaplan, to get his views on the subject as well. And again, Adam is very much he's been one of these people that has been caught in Aveilim at this time, and has felt the need to say kaddish. So whatever your views are on this subject of whether or not Minyonim should be held in gardens, I guess we should really sum up now and try and get to the point. I think the point is that the debate very much changes when we look at Aveilim particularly, because I personally would share my point of view that I couldn't see the point in risking lives carelessly just for the sake of holding davening. I understand davening is important to people. I understand davening with the minions important to people, but I wouldn't do it unless it enabled somebody to be able to say kaddish. And until you're in that situation, you could never. I mean, I'm not in a position to say that it's right or it's wrong on that basis, but just to reiterate for people that didn't catch the beginning of this, in no way are we suggesting that there is any shul organized minyonim going on. It's very much an independent and personal decision.
Correct. And I think, to help summarize with that, again, I would agree with that. The question would just be how people see, what risks people are not willing to take. I know that there was a bishop, Bishop Vincent Nichols, the Bishop of Westminster, who actually came out and said the following: we should, he doesn't understand why shops like B&Q garden centers are open for people to be able to gardening, and yet communities or synagogues are not open. And his point really was that, it depends what you consider important. So the government is trying to get businesses going again. It's trying to keep people busy. And so the government says, okay, you can go to B&Q if you want to buy petunias and you want to buy violets, whatever. You can go there and you can stand around other people. And I've been into a lot of shops. And I find in general, as much as they've made lines and everything, I don't know about you, David, but I've found in general, you walk into a shop, the social distancing goes out of the window.
It can do. Laura mentioned earlier that she finds the shopping really stressful, and I've got to say, I'm not
talking about from shops. I'm talking about even in Tesco.
I'm talking about Sainsbury's or anything else. Even though they make you queue up outside, clearly separated. Once you get inside the shop, it becomes It's like the Wild West in there.
Nobody listens. And then I know there are lines on the floor, but I don't find people listen to the, I just have to walk back. Well, I'm going to walk all the way around, come back and go all this way around. And it's very complicated for people to do that. And so that this, the bishop said, how come the government thinks it's okay for people to do non-essential shopping? Essential shopping is something else, but non-essential shopping is okay and prayer is not okay. And again, it all depends on where you're willing to, if you see things as a risk or not. If you think that you're doing things according to government guidelines, then for many people, they say, if I'm doing what the government said is safe, this is not a risk. Or it is a risk I'm willing to take. In the same way I'm willing to take the risk I'm going into Tesco, I'm taking the same risk when I'm going to Minyan. I'm standing 2 meters away from everybody else. I'm doing what I can. When I go to the park, I do that. If I go out for a walk, I'll do that. When I stand at my Minyan, I'll do the same thing. Others will comment and say, no, this is definitely taking an unnecessary risk. And even if it's a 0.00001 chance of a risk of pikuach nefesh, they will definitely say, no, but that's inside shuls. But here we're talking about outdoors, Stephen. We're talking about outdoor minyonim, not indoor minyonim. So actually being inside a shop is a lot worse than being in a garden for half an hour, because you're actually inside a building with people for 15 minutes. Okay.
Modi has stated that prayer doesn't help the economy.
Which is what the Bishop of Westminster was saying. If it doesn't help the economy, then the government doesn't think it's important. I don't know if I want to take such a cynical view, but what I want to say is, if you do what you're supposed to do and you keep the social distancing guidelines, for some people they say, I've done what I'm supposed to do, and beyond that, I'm allowed to have a minyan because I'm doing what the government said is safe. Others will say this is only a sort of a guideline, but it's not really safe. Different people take different views on it. I don't think it's illegal, because if it was illegal, then my friend's minyan who he had would have been shut down, and a lot of other minyan would have been shut down, and they haven't, even though the police has come by and has seen them. They are not illegal. It's for every person really to decide, is it something that they want to do? Is it something that they feel comfortable with? And is it something that they really feel is worth the risk? Or maybe there is no risk at all, and so there's not even a risk to be spoken about.
So I'd like to thank you for your time, Rabbi Eisenberg. We've managed to hold the attention of upwards of 40, 50 people for over an hour now, which shows that hopefully the subject matter is engaging and the format is working. And it's been nice to be able to see everybody's comments on screen. One of those comments was from Phil Morrison, who is asking...
Comments.
Sorry?
I didn't realize I could also get the comments. I was on the private chat.
Well, there you go. Yeah, see the comments now. So Phil Morrison is saying, what's next week's subject? So next week, we discussed this earlier. One of the subjects that we've been asked to cover by a number of different people is the subject of organ donation, which again, there's been recent sort of change in law. it'd be interesting to get the Jewish perspective on organ donation. It is again a very sensitive and emotive discussion, but one that I hope will be very engaging. So if everybody tunes in next week at 8 o'clock, that's the subject that we'll be discussing.
We'll also try to get, by the way, I'm sorry for all those people that didn't manage to get on via YouTube. I'm making an apology now that it didn't really work 100%. I'm really sorry about that, but we will get it working for next week, and hopefully, maybe the other thing that we could do, but again, I'd have to mute everybody. Maybe what we should do is, should we have a Zoom? Should I just put on Zoom as well?
If you could broadcast to Zoom at the same time, then that's great.
Make it slightly later, just because in order for us to be able to for the minyan to finish, for me to get onto my Zoom to be able to do it.
David wants us off Facebook and on Zoom. David, I'm afraid I look just as pretty on Zoom as I do on Facebook, so it won't save you in that respect. Some other comments. Thanks to you, David, for hosting. Thank you, Stephen, for contributing, and thanks to you, Rabbi, for your thoughts. I thought Stephen was thanking himself for a minute, but I think he was thanking our friend Stephen Weisglass. Again, great discussion and engaging content. Jeff Radovan echoes it. Also does Anthony, and Ian Michael Creek says the same. So I'm glad it's been a success. I'm glad everybody's found it interesting. We're going to have another go next week, so stay tuned and be well. Stay safe. Whatever you do, stay safe. That's the main thing.
Don't forget, by the way, we are still davening on Zoom, and that's not dangerous. And anybody who says it's too dangerous to come to Minyan, you can join us on Zoom tomorrow morning, 7:45 Mishnah Shir, 8 o'clock davening. If that's too late for you, 7:45 Mincha Mariv. Please join us. It's not dangerous. Your computer won't sneeze, won't cough, or won't do anything to you. And you can show that even though you're not willing to come and join a garden minyan, you're still willing to join a virtual minyan, and that davening is still important to you.
Adam Shogger's not learnt his lesson from the end of the last discussion that we held in Shul on women's rights. He's coming right at the end. He thinks it's rubbish. Thank you, Adam. You have a lovely sense of humor. Michael Gasworth would like to know what time Mincha is.
7:45. 7:45. Mincha followed immediately by Mariv.
Okay. David Cohen is wishing everybody keep safe. Ivana Benjamin, hello. That's from Lawrence, hiding under his wife's account there. The other Stephen he meant. There you go. And we'll see you all next week.
Please God. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.